G'day, everybody.
Hello.
Well, it's last day of team. It's the first ever design breakout session that we can remember at team. And because it's about design, it's going to be a little bit looser. There's no pie charts. We're probably going to ignore most of the marketing guidance about what we're meant to say. And we're just stoked to be here. My name's Charlie. I look after the design for the platform and the apps.
And I'm Josh. I look after brand and creative teams.
And it's a very good question to say, why are we having a breakout session? And hopefully one of the takeaways you had from Mike's introduction at the beginning of team was that we're making a huge investment in design of the platform and of the apps. And the reason why we're doing it particularly now is that the way the system of work is evolving, it really needs this sense of cohesion. It has to feel like one hand made all of those experiences so that your experience of use feels seamless. And so we're going to be going quite deep on design. We're going to be getting a little bit nerdy today because I feel like this is a great quote about design. To me, I've always been inspired by the mid-century designers, and some of you may be familiar with Charles and Ray Eames, two of the greats of design of the 20th century. And they had this wonderful description of what design is. And I think it encapsulated so much of our joint thinking, which is to be a great designer is to be a great host. I think a lot of you might have been to a really good dinner party in your lives where you felt like someone really thought about everything. You know, where you sat, your allergies, what you like to drink, who will be good company. And to me, that's a great encapsulation of what design is. And sometimes it's even more special and you appreciate the meal maybe just that little bit more when the host tells you how they made it. You know, you don't always agree with how much salt they put in the dishes, but when they tell you where the ingredients are from, why they sat you where they sat you, sometimes the meal is just that little bit more enjoyable. And so that's really the spirit of what we're trying to do here today. As much as there is a deep strategic reason why we're investing in design and why it matters so much to the philosophy of the system of work, I think in spirit, it's about being a good host. And we showed a lot of things during the keynote, and you might have been almost consuming them ambiently, and you'll be looking at things going, why are all the icons orange now? Like, is that new navigation? I haven't seen that before. I haven't seen those icons. So this is a chance for all of us just to rest in the detail together, because I think design ultimately is about the detail. And so we're going to be going deep on all the things on this screen and more. But I really wanted to start, and Josh and I thought it was a great place in what is the spirit of all design systems. Because what you see here is that not just one design system, it's the integration of many systems, and at the heart of all of them is the tone, the feeling, and the expressiveness of the brand system. And so Josh is gonna get into that.
Right on. Thanks, Charlie. So yeah, you know, I think it may seem fortunate that we kicked these things, these two projects off simultaneously, but actually it was a very strategic decision to do so. We intentionally wanted to intertwine both the brand design and what you feel in the app design. Because our mission to unleash the potential of every team, our goal is to become the brand synonymous with teamwork. And so we feel the collaboration between the two is really important. So think about iconic brands, maybe your favorite brand. Consistent visual elements create a powerful cognitive shortcut for customers. When a brand consistently uses typography and color across all their touch points, it becomes instantly recognizable. And think about how quickly you can identify brands like this, or this, without even seeing their name. Iconic brands like Apple, Coke, and Nike offer more than just a product. They offer a connection emotionally across every touch point. So just like these brands, we know that the experience doesn't start or end in a marketing or app experience. It's all interconnected. And the stronger that connection is, the better experience you all have. And that's why we set a vision for these experiences. It started with brand, and it had to be collaborative. I'm going to get into some of the decisions that we made to establish this and land this new experience that you all will experience as the new Atlassian experience, starting with our message. So at Atlassian, we believe teamwork drives best outcomes. Our software empowers organizations of all sizes to do small tasks and impossible feats, which would otherwise be impossible alone. From everyday tasks, we want to empower those teams to do it the fastest and simplest way that we can. So you may have seen our Impossible Alone campaign, which we aimed to tell this story. And so I'd like to share a film that we put together to tell this story and introduce the Atlassian platform to the world.
Steve is great. Meets his deadlines, keeps his plants alive. And Mia, super smart. Andre's amazing. He's never missed an email. But from here, you can see they're part of something bigger. One team, building the world. At Atlassian, we believe real progress takes all of us, working together on new sources of energy. Cars that drive to the future. Even pizza deliveries. Pizza. Together, we can go beyond where we've ever been. Up and away. Collaborating from anywhere on anything and everything. Atlassian makes software for teams to do what is impossible alone.
So with our brand platform established, we need to create a visual language that expresses this unique and in a unique and authentic way. When we started the journey, we asked ourselves, what does teamwork look like today? Additionally, we had to establish some principles, with the number one principle being, if these decisions don't work within our app experience, they don't work. And so the visual language that we developed employs an approach of typography that uses mixed media, and it helps express these complex ideas of teamwork in a visually engaging way. It's a bit messy, a bit eclectic, and it encompasses a lot of different perspectives, just like teamwork. So I just want to play this quick video of where we landed on a very long journey. Thank you. Thanks. So our refreshed identity becomes a visual representation of Atlassian. But many of those visual decisions actually had very heavy app implications. So much so that we obviously had to co-own those decisions with product design and brand design. For instance, you may have noticed that some of the updates in the logos and icons, these changes strengthen not only our brand identity by making it simpler to navigate and helping teams move faster. Our color system also evolved. The interaction of our colors when they overlap produces exciting and unexpected results, which can tell a deeper story around the transformation that takes place when teammates come together. However, some of these color palettes must still be accessible and functional for things like our app experience. The imagery and compositions we crafted for storytelling use photos, hand-drawn elements, and gestural lines to express beauty and the challenge of the human collaboration. And it also must represent different aspects of our story. People, apps, practices, and the achievements of teams. And then finally, our custom typeface, Charlie Sands, not named after this Charlie, but just as loved. It delivers our message in a clear and relatable way. When deconstructed, it serves as the foundation for our compositions, which helps hint to our teamwork story in another and deeper way. It's important that these types are harmonious with the type that are in your app experience and harmonious with the other typefaces throughout other touch points. And this is something that Charlie will talk about in just a moment. So with product and brand design working together on these foundational decisions, we can ensure that all aspects of our customer experience, from the daily email you get in Jira, to the Atlassian brand campaign, to the experience you have here at Team 25, all feel natural extensions of each other and like they came from the same hand. One of the things that I'll add is the experience that you have with the Atlassian brand is important, but the most important one is the one that you have within the app experience. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Charlie to get into the details of that.
In case you couldn't tell, Josh is a pretty modest guy. I think the transformation in the brand, for those of you who have been Atlassian customers and partners and developers for a long time, I think you can all remember that oof of seeing the color and the dynamism of the type and the illustration and the animation. And for me, it was one of the boldest reimaginings of a brand that I've seen for a long time. But if we continue our restaurant analogy, I think we've all walked into beautiful restaurants where the table is laid perfectly and everything looks on point. But when you eat, it can be jarring because it doesn't feel like the same mind or the same person was thinking about both experiences. And what's really important with the system of work is that a lot of us are moving from maybe being in one app, right? We're using Jira for 90% of our day or Confluence for 90% of our day. And as our workflow matures and we work with other teammates, we're moving into Rovo, we're moving into goals, we're moving into teams, and that really has to feel as seamless and effortless as possible. And so what we're going to do now is actually dive into the thinking behind all of the different parts of the design. We're going to work our way up a stack. And I think the best way to think about design is as a series of interconnected layers where each layer as a foundation creates something for the next layer. And you have to be very careful about how those things interrelate. You know, for example, at the bottom, you actually have the spacing and layout of all of the different apps. You move up through icon and type and color. And ultimately, all of those things have to cohere very, very carefully so that when you actually get to the app experience and you start interacting, there's a sense of wholeness, both in the use of color, but functionally how that you move around different parts of the interface. So what I'm going to do now is going to go through that layer by layer deconstruction. Now, if we had 5 hours, we could go through everything, but I'm really going to be sort of cherry picking individual things that hopefully summarize the intent behind the design at each layer. And we're going to start at the foundation, which is spacing, grid, and layout. Now, as someone who may not be a designer, I think you actually have a remarkably good sense, like all humans do, of when something feels right from a layout perspective. Maybe we can't communicate it in technical terms, but often what we'll say when the layout is wrong is that things feel crowded, or I can't find stuff. There's that sense of visual load where you're scanning around a page trying to identify something. And that's a sign often that this underlying foundation isn't working, that there's something off. And one of the reasons things can actually be off is they're mathematically off. Something that you need to do when you're creating layouts is actually get the maths right, because what happens is all of the little parts of the UI need to correspond to each other in a mathematical system. So one of the first things we did when we were redesigning a lot of the app experiences is we had to choose the atomic unit of the layout. What is the thing that we build everything around? Every icon, every drop-down menu, every animation, and we build it out on an 8-pixel element. So you can see there, that's actually the technical naming that engineers and designers will see of what's called a token. So that's something that in Figma or in code that we can all refer to understand what a value is. And so everything is based around 8 pixels. And that means that you already get a mathematical constant that goes through the entire system. That's important because I guess if you deconstruct all UIs, they're ultimately a series of grids. And they're trying to direct where your eye goes so that you're doing as little work as possible. And so by having that spacing system, what we can do is we can create these series of grids. And where you see those columns is where we'll probably have a sidebar or a rail of icons so that you always know where to go to look for something. Those grids are particularly important because most of you have completely different browser sizes and resolutions. And during our day, we're often resizing things. We're going between tabs. So you need a very, very smart grid system so that as you scale or compress your browser, that things lay out correctly. And I think a lot of you might have had an experience, particularly in mobile web, where menus start to overlap other menus and drop-downs fly off the page. That's often because there isn't an underlying logic in the spacing system. And maybe a way to kind of bring it to an individual part of the UI. So this is a piece of information about goals. And what you see on the right is actually all of the spacing tokens that design and engineering are using, so that every time you see a headline, so the word goals, and then you see that first layer of text, there's always a logical and coherent distance between those two things. Now you might think, okay, that sounds like interesting detail, but what does that mean? Imagine how much work your eye is doing every time you scroll a page, and how many things you scroll every day, and how often your eye is having to bounce back and forth. If there isn't a logical system, you're effectively doing more work. And that's actually one of the reasons why we often feel tired at the end of the day, is that we actually are feeling a form of visual exhaustion because of inconsistencies in layout. One of the other advantages of redoing the system is that we could actually find space. Like ultimately, the apps are about your work and your content. And so what you see here on the left-hand side is the navigation that many of you may still be using in cloud. And by redefining our spacing system, the first thing we were able to do is get more vertical compression. So you could see more of a page tree. These are the same resolution. And then we can also start to get less truncation because we can move the gutters and the differences between the bullet and the title. We can make them tighter, and that will still feel logical. So often the reason why we nerd out on spacing is we're trying to reclaim space for you, to make sure there is as much of your content on screen at one time. And that's particularly important in places like Confluence, where you have a lot of indentation. You're tabbing in through often 3, 4, 5, 6 layers in a content tree. And maybe a good expression of how it comes together in one of the apps that we spoke about this week on stage is think about all of the invisible grid lines that are there. Imagine you're looking at this as a designer. There's all these intersecting lines. But as your eye goes down, say, for example, the Good Morning Brian to frequently visited to what's next, there's a continual travel so that you know how to pick up the next task. Your eye knows where to go. And that's why spacing is so important. Iconography, the next part of the foundation, is our first part of audience participation. Designers can't answer any of these questions. Pop quiz. How many icons do you think there are in the Atlassian app system? Just shout a number out.
300.
Keep going. Keep going. 11,500 icons over 20 years. That's a lot of icons. Next thing we're all going to do together is we're all going to be graphic designers for a second. I want everyone to squint, almost close your eyes at the left-hand side. And you can probably see all these blocks of differing density. It's because some of the icons are filled. Some of them are different sizes. Some of them have different weightings in the stroke, so how they're actually drawn. Again, that is a lot of work for the eye. If you squint and look at the right-hand side, which is hundreds and hundreds of new custom icons we've had to deprecate, there's a visual uniformity there so that everything feels like it's part of the same system. The reason why that's particularly important is because all of you use non-Atlassian apps. So we're actually bringing a lot of third-party app icons into the system. So what we don't want to do is have a situation where suddenly everything feels incoherent. So we've really put a lot of effort in tuning our icons just through sheer cleaning up reasons. Another reason is that, for example, you're a Confluence user and you've only been using Confluence. One of the things we ran into is that different teams would just use icons arbitrarily. So it was like, I don't know, 4 round circles, that looks like a good icon to use. Multiply by 20 years by 11,000 icons, you have a situation where suddenly different apps are using the same icon and they mean completely different things. So we've actually had to go through those 11,000 and make sure that the metaphors are logical. So a good example would be, there's a fundamental relationship between the app switcher, the 4 circles you see up the top left, and more apps. Those 2 metaphors relate to each other. And so part of the cleanup we're having to do is to make sure that all of those things are consistent. Another challenge we had to solve is that often the way that designers and engineers would make an icon is they would just scale things up. And so we would often have weird sizes or the wrong sizes. So we put a ton of effort into making sure that there is a consistent scaling system. I'm going to give you a particularly nerdy, this is probably the deepest nerdy moment, which gives designers like a warm flush of joy, is the stroke width on the open, pop open a new modal or a new tab is 2 pixels, right? It's awkwardly large and thicker than the text next to it. And what we've done is we've aligned the stroke width of the icons with the width of the type that is next to them. This is an extremely nerdy detail, but I have never had clapping for stroke width in my entire life. That's a highlight. But you're seeing these things tens of thousands of times a day subconsciously. And when you go to a coworker and say, hey, you should really use the goals app, and they're like, it's just too busy for me, often what they're responding to is this. They can't necessarily articulate it, but it's many of these discontinuities. And actually, I lied, there was an even nerdier example, because we actually scaled our icons up and down often without being thoughtful about spacing. You get these situations where the button and the icon are sort of weirdly close together. And what that actually affects is your readability, your ability to identify very quickly what that button does. And so what we've done on the right-hand side is make sure that all of the spacing, using those same spacing systems, is consistent. So the icon can breathe inside the button a little bit more. I promise this is as nerdy as the whole discussion is going to get. But again, these things accrete over and over. And I'll give you a good example. So this is the goals page. We won't pop quiz about how many icons there are, but there are a lot of icons. So if any of these things are incoherent, you won't be able to identify the next action easily. So this is the type of detail that we're going to in design to make sure that at the aggregate level, when someone says, oh, you used the new goals app yesterday, and yeah, I could find out how to filter by myself. It's an interaction with an icon based on a spacing system that is much tighter than it had been before. So we're moving up the layers. Now we're at typography. What we announced on stage, and you might have missed it, is we've actually created 2 brand new typefaces, Atlassian Sans and Atlassian Mono. And the reason we've done that is because designers only use Macs, which is actually a true story. Most designers use Macs, which means we're seeing the system font that comes with every MacBook, which is Helvetica New. But every single browser and operating system has a different preloaded typeface, and they actually all vary. And what that means is, at least in design, we're not using the same typefaces that our customers are using. Most of our customers are on Seago. But the other problem is that maybe you've really carefully done the title for your Confluence page to make sure that it doesn't wrap to the new line. You know, it's always really awful when you get that, what we call an orphan or a widow word that goes to the next line. And then in our browser, it didn't wrap, because there was a minute difference in the typography, but on your colleague's browser, it did wrap. So these little differences add up, which is why we've now moved to a custom-made typeface. So no matter what browser, no matter what platform it's going to, we're all seeing exactly the same thing. That really matters. Again, I first clap for a typeface. You always know there are designers in the room when there's a clap for a typeface. Now, the reason we need 2, most of you will be seeing Atlassian Sans, and it's optimized for readability. So when you're looking at large chunks of text on a page, it's really important that you can kind of go through it, find the heading, find the table. But there are other cases actually where legibility, the ability to pick out semantic meaning very quickly, is equally important. And Atlassian Mono is for IDEs, for software development environments, because what I need to know on the right-hand side is something different. All of those text strings actually have semantic meaning in code, and if I'm trying to find a bug or trying to understand why something doesn't work, I need to very quickly be able to zoom into a particular word or character. So this is why we need two typefaces. And to get into the history of that, has anyone, this is always a depressing question to ask audiences, has anyone used a typewriter before? My people, all right. You have used a monospace font. You know, on a typewriter, every single metal key, the characters are exactly the same width, right? Whereas in digital typefaces, those widths are variable to make sure there's a lot of readability. So monospace is really interesting, and you have to actually do weird things like choose the 0 character. So these are all the 0 characters from different open source typefaces, and we actually went to our engineering teams and said, which one of these is easiest for you to read? Because they're seeing a lot of zeros in their code, and we ended up on one that was based on an open source typeface called JetBrains with the /0. So this sounds like an absurd level of detail, but if you're a software developer, your IDE and it being legible is absolutely crucial. But we run into a challenge. System fonts don't have to get downloaded. They're just part of your operating system. So anytime you create a custom font, it has to be delivered to the browser, and then you create a performance question, because no one wants to see their fonts change in the middle of writing a document while a browser sucks down. So we've made a lot of really interesting performance optimizations. One thing we've done, for example, is acknowledge that most of us use only a small subset of all of the available characters in a typeface. So I'm a native English speaker or native Australian speaker, which is roughly the same thing. I very rarely use umlauts and extended characters. So we actually only download the Latin basic characters initially in the package, so that we can get it coming down really fast. We've even done things like optimizing caching in the CDNs, and all of this optimization work has got us to a point where it's 68 kilobytes to deliver the initial load of that typeface to your browser. And for those of you who aren't in the technical business, like nothing on the internet is 68 kilobytes. That's a very small amount of information. So this is the type of work that we need to do behind the scenes to make sure that all these different font weights, all these different headings, they can all get to your browser very quickly. And to bring it back up to the apps, if I'm inside Focus, so I'm the chief operating officer, and I want to understand why something is off track, typography is actually very meaningful. Knowing where to look in this screen is often about typographic emphasis. So that's why we've also tried to reinvent that foundation. And then we're moving up to color. Josh and his team gave us the most wonderful color system to work with. It's about as bold and expressive as you could ever want. I love these things, but I got to turn them into these things. And these colors are so expressive, we have to be very thoughtful. So the first thing we had to do when we were collaborating back 18, 24 months ago is go, which purple are we going to use? Because we already had a lot of purple, probably too much purple if you've seen our purple boxes. What we need to do is to try and make sure that we're at least using the same color values. And one of the challenges is that color has a lot of different meanings. So as much as Josh and I can say that orange is dynamic and purple is warm, whatever it might be, color has semantic meaning. And what I mean by that is that if you go to many cultures, red, yellow, and green means something. And it gets tricky because does green mean done? Or does green mean your OKR is on target and blue should be done? So you're actually having to be careful about semantic meanings. Then there's personalization. If you looked at my Trello board, it's got a lot of red for things that don't mean stop or off track. So you have to incorporate non-semantic meaning. Then there's accessibility. A very large percentage of the world will not see all of the colors on this chart. And so we have to make sure that contrast is doing a lot of the job. There has to be the right amount of contrast between a yellow and a purple, because there are people in this audience who are seeing gray or who are seeing very muddy colors. So contrast has to work underneath. And then you get a lot of functional challenges, like it has to work in dark mode. And I think you can see how this comes together across the apps, where we're making sure the semantic meaning, the red, yellow, green, is the same across apps. And that's really important because at a glance, I know what is on track and what is off track, whether I'm talking about a goal, an OKR type goal, whether I'm talking about a focus area, same meaning in all of the apps. And of course, we have to carry that through to dark mode, where we need to change some of those contrast values. And a great example of how it all comes together is someone in a Jira list. They've got the marketing colors, so the things that we've actually think will really celebrate different teammates as the real-time people editing this list. There's semantic color for the goal meanings, whether they're on track or off track. And then someone has chosen a custom icon from our icon set that also is harmonious. So color is one of those things where I tend to find you'll never make everybody happy. It is a very personal thing, but we believe we've tried to be as thoughtful as possible to make sure that everyone is getting something that makes sense to them. And this brings me to accessibility. And I think it's really important with accessibility to remind ourselves of a couple of things. We will all need assistance in our lives. It's just a matter of context, time, situation. And accessibility is something that we're incredibly passionate about at Atlassian, not only because we have to look after every teammate around the world, but also because we believe that great accessibility is just great design. I'm going to give you an example. This is a calendar date picker, one of the more mundane things in an interface. We have a challenge right now that when you open a calendar date picker, if I might just be tabbing my way through fields. A lot of you are power keyboard users, so you'll tab, tab, tab. So the tab behavior here is it actually takes me into the calendar and immediately to the month change. And then I have to tab down to the day and then tab again. So it's taking me like 4 or 5 tabs to get out of jail. But if you're using a voice assistive device or service, it's reading each one of those things, and it actually doesn't even know it's on a calendar. So for someone who's using assistive devices, they're not getting the information they need. So what we did instead was change the UI elements slightly so that we clearly identified that the next tab would take you to an action is, do you want to open the calendar? We don't open it for you. And if you're not interested, don't press space or return, just tab it down to the next field. So that means that power tab users and people who are using assistive services like voice are both getting a more efficient and easy to use experience. And that to me is a great demonstration of why accessibility is good design. We fixed, I think, a problem for everybody by making sure we were looking after people who had particular needs when it came to assistance. And we've shipped over 6,000 accessibility improvements over the last year. The job is never done, but I feel like those 6,000 makes the work of everyone in this room a little bit easier. And this is all available, everything I've gone through in these foundations at the new refreshed Atlassian.design website. So you yourself can see the React code, you can see the tokens, you can see the guidelines. So if you're a designer, a partner, a developer, all of those resources are available for you too, because we're really passionate that everybody should get the benefit of these changes. So that was a very quick overview of the foundations. Let's see how now we bring them up into the interface layer and into navigation. Now, whenever we talk about navigation, and I say this as someone who's worked at a lot of different companies over the years, it's one of the most sensitive topics you could imagine because it's the tangible expression of the UI. I may not have an opinion about color tokens, but I have an opinion about navigation. And there is no one perspective on navigation. If you're a developer who's been using Jira for 12 years, you've got a perspective. If you're a COO who's using Focus and nothing else, you've got a perspective. We need to somehow find a balance between all of those perspectives, big and small, complex and simple workflows. And one way we can find that balance is just be very staged and careful in our testing. So going back 18 months, we actually created a Chrome plugin that we released. Some of you may have seen this, to just get the work out there before it even was functional from a code point of view. We've got 160 diverse set of users trying this Chrome plugin. Then we released it to Atlassian internally. And if you ever think you've given us a hard time, Atlassian users of Jira give us a very, very hard time. So it was actually really interesting to have 10,000 Atlassians using this because they are, in many cases, the ultimate power users of customized Confluence and Jira. Then we went to an EAP program to a beta, and I'm really happy to announce that GA announcement was in the middle of March, and over the next months we're going to be rolling out to standard and premium. And we've tried to do it in this phased way, so we're learning as we go. We're getting feedback and finding themes. One of the big themes that we heard was, why do the apps look and work differently? I'm going between Jira and Confluence, I need it to be more coherent. That came across from many of our different user groups. Naturally, we heard a lot about ease of use. People want things to be more efficient, more findable. There was a lot of desire for customization, and obviously customization takes two forms. There's the customization of features, like an admin turning on Jira plans, but there's also just personalization, like that it feels like Jira is my Jira. And the final thing we heard is that many of you are asking for the interface to be more modern, and modern's a tricky word, right? Like modern art. What does modern mean? I think ultimately modern means approachable and feels like it's something that you could recommend to somebody to say, hey, try Trello, try Confluence, and that person feels like it's a very modern, approachable experience. So we heard this, and the navigation is a response to these four themes. So looking into consistency, the Confluence that many of our customers are getting today is this, and we really needed to first simplify top navigation because literally we were running out of space. Over the years, and you told us this, we would add a new feature and add a new feature, gets longer and longer. There's no clear information hierarchy why they're there. And what we've done by cleaning up the top navigation is try to make sure that all of the like actions are with like areas. So rather than having to go to the top nav, to the side nav, to the main work area, there's a logic there. And we've tried to make sure that global actions, I think this week you all heard how critical Rovo is and how much enterprise search is a part of the system of work. We really want to make sure that they really clearly are available in top navigation. Confluence is another great example. You can see the crowding. So we added, a lot of you may be using this feature, data classification, so the ability to say something is confidential. We're flat out of space. So when people ask us, why do you change nav, is that we want to give more capability. We want to give more functionality. It's just running out of space. And the answer might be, oh, put it in a menu. Well, the challenge of putting it all in a menu is that your menu needs to work across multiple sizes and multiple browsers. And a lot of you may remember situations where menus were overlapping with other menus. So we really felt like a simplified top navigation was the basis of the system. And you can see that as you start to use more apps across the system of work, this gives you this unified starting point. The same information architecture is across all of the apps. And again, I'm a huge Confluence user. I haven't up until now used Focus very much. We're starting to use it inside Atlassian a ton. It's very helpful that the architecture of the sidebar is the same. It doesn't have a different way of doing start or a different way of doing elements of the UI. The other thing we've tried to make sure is that global actions work the same way. So almost all of our apps will have a for you place, a recent and a start, and they will work the same way. So you always know how to find something that's assigned to you or that you might have created. Another big change that we've made is to adopt tabs more widely. I think the reason that's important is that it collects all of the work around a project or an object or a focus area or a goal into a similar place. And so no matter what app you go to now, you get a very similar type of tab system that's extendable, it's scalable, and it's customizable. And underneath this, going back to some nerdy design system stuff, we've built it out of maybe 3 components. They're reusing the same elements over and over again, and the advantage for customers, it's much more performant. When you build an interface out of a smaller number of components, they tend to be more coherent, and engineers tend to be able to do much more efficient interface work, so this is actually a lot faster. So a good example now is every time you see a 3-dot menu, which we affectionately call the meatballs, for reasons I cannot remember, it works the same way. So across all of the apps, you can know where to find actions on an object by leveraging these common components under the hood. Of course, we want to make things easy to use, and there was some really simple stuff, which is having a common way to collapse the sidebar. It seems simple, but for various historical reasons, all of the apps did it a slightly different way. The icon was in a different place, the animation was different. One of the other things we think really helps with ease of use is just to have more visibility. So in the Jira project sidebar, these are all projects from totally different parts of the Jira universe, but you can see them all in one place rather than having to bounce back and forth. And maybe like me, a lot of you are working on multiple projects, or you're working with multiple teams with multiple projects. So I just very quickly star them if I know I need to go and check them again, and they're always in my recent hierarchy. We've also tried to do a ton to clean up the Jira work item view. This is the most high traffic UI element in all of Atlassian, and we have to be very careful how we do it, but what we're trying to do is to take as much visual weight out of it as we can, because it really was getting cluttered with actions that have been added over the years. And so what we did is we looked at the stats about the most common actions that occurred, and we moved them into this quick action menu, and statistically those first two actions are done overwhelmingly the most by all Jira users, and this is really a sliding scale of how often those actions occur, and it just lets us de-weight the interface a ton to make things more findable. Confluence is another area where we've really just tried to simplify things. Confluence sharing was maybe one of the more unnecessarily complex things we've had over the years, because permissions and sharing were separate, and what we've done is we've brought them together into one construct, which is very familiar to most knowledge workers. Permissions and sharing should be together. And this is just an example of the type of ease of use work that we need to do. Customization, just simple stuff. Like if you've got a universal sidebar information architecture, that means that everybody, regardless of what app they're in, they can start to perform these universal actions. This doesn't mess with the customization that an admin has done. Like plans is still available, dashboards are still available, but I can put them in the order that makes sense for my workflow. And I can do exactly the same thing inside the tab system. This is, apologies for designers in the audience, I didn't have a mock of this, so if you see your face here, you can add, modify, drag shortcuts. It's that same idea of we're not changing the functionality, we're just making sure that you can make it your own. And we've also done that conceptually to the Jira work item concept itself. This is a lot of approachability. Is Jira issue as familiar as it is to many of us? Imagine you're inside the Focus app and your CEO is saying, I want to understand how everything is going, and it said there are 25,000 issues, and he'd be like, that doesn't sound like a very good thing. Work item is a more flexible construct, and it lets people assign the name to the work item that makes sense for the work that they're doing. So in this particular case, UX copywriters, their unit of work is copy. So that's what they can call all of the work items inside their project. And the final thing on ease of use, which I like, is just emojis. Small changes make a big difference. So in Confluence, now all of the emojis are visible in the page tree. But we've also made sure that the emojis are reflected in favicons in browsers. Because I don't know about you, most of my life was staring at 32 blue Confluence icons and then trying to understand what was what. So these little changes actually, when they aggregate, are a big difference in ease of use. And finally, we get to modernization, this idea of making things more approachable. Because I know that the Jira list view, if I sent it to someone who's joined the brand design team and they were working at Apple and they were using another app, they know how these list views work. So it's a way of being able to bring more teamworks into the work, is to make the interfaces more intuitive. It's also the reason why we've cleaned up so much of the work item view, because that lets someone who's using Jira for the first time go, okay, all I need to understand is the description, the attachments, and who's assigned. I don't need to see 50 other fields that may not be relevant to me. We've made a ton of small changes just to make things more visually appealing. So what I love in, for example, Confluence whiteboards is they're increasingly looking more aesthetically pleasing. The point of having a visual app and interface is when you send a whiteboard to someone with your Loom, it should look good. And I think a lot of these small changes are in service of helping your content shine. And Confluence, I think we've made over 55 improvements recently, everything from big changes like live docs, but to really small but consequential changes like when you put in the title for your page and hit return, it goes to the next line. Who knew? What a genius moment of design that was. But for the last 20 years, it did not do that, and that was very frustrating. So there's been a ton of work across all of the design teams just to slowly whittle away these impediments that made the apps maybe feel more difficult for you to recommend to a teammate because they didn't feel approachable enough. I know that was a very fast tour through what is a very deep subject, but I hope you're coming away with 3 things. First of all, that the system of work and the increasing use of apps means that we really all need more coherence. It should all feel like one person made them. In design, we really do care about the detail, and design is a game of detail. It's all about those tiny things that aggregate up. And the third thing is we really are trying to be a good host, but we're going to be a good host to 350,000 customers and millions of users and tens of thousands of admins. So it's all about balance. We won't always get it right. Some of your food will be too salty. Some of your drinks will come too late. But hopefully you feel that as a host, we're really trying to make sure that you have the best experience possible. And with that, I will hand back to Josh to take us out. Over to you.
Thanks, man. That was awesome. Thanks, Charlie. So yeah, as Charlie said, ultimately, what our 2 teams are trying to do is make it feel like the elements of design that you touch every day came from one hand. And that it's a thoughtful hand and a great host, not hundreds of different people thinking what they think is best. So we made some big steps this year, and we're still on that journey, and it will continue. But again, our hope today is that you leave with the understanding about our thinking and care that goes into the tools that you use every day to unleash the power of your team. Thank you.